Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going deep on something super important in design and architecture, but maybe not the most exciting sounding thing at first. Project stakeholder management.
Yeah, it's not exactly the stuff of design magazines.
Right, but we found this excerpt from Project Stakeholder Management, Engagement and Influence. And honestly, it's way more interesting than I expected.
It really gets you thinking about how managing people is just as crucial to a project as managing budgets or timelines, especially in design and architecture.
Totally. So the source defines stakeholders as all parties who will be affected by or will affect the project's outcome, which, when you think about it, is pretty much everyone in a big design project, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Way more people than you might think at first glance. I mean, obviously, you've got your clients.
Right.
But then there are architects, contractors, government agencies, permitting and zoning and all that.
Yeah.
And even just the people in the community who are going to have to live with or use whatever you design. It's like you make one decision and it has this ripple effect, touching all these different people.
Exactly. And the source talks about how the whole idea of stakeholder management has really evolved over time. Like back in the 1980s, it barely got a mention in the PMI's PMBOK guide. They were all about the processes, the deliverables.
So what changed? Why this big shift towards the people side of things?
Well, I think it's partly because projects themselves have gotten so much more complex. Think about design now. There's not just about pretty drawings. You've got sustainability to worry about, these crazy zoning laws, specialized consultants for every little detail, and all those moving parts. That means more stakeholders, more people with different interests and levels of influence you have to consider.
It's like the design world went from a solo act to a full orchestra. Suddenly, you've got all these different players to manage. Exactly. And you have to understand each player's part, how they contribute to the overall piece. So the source lays out these three key processes. First, identifying all your stakeholders, then figuring out how you'll engage with them, and finally actually managing those relationships throughout the whole project.
But how do you even begin to identify all those stakeholders, especially on a huge project? It seems overwhelming.
There are some tools to help with that, like the source talks about a stakeholder breakdown structure. Sounds kind of technical, but it's really just grouping stakeholders into categories. So you might have your internal stakeholders, like your design team, and then your external stakeholders, like those government agencies or community groups we talked about.
It's like organizing the chaos a bit, making sure you're not forgetting anyone important.
Exactly. And then once you've figured out who everyone is, you create this thing called the stakeholder register. Basically, it's your master list of everyone involved, their contact info, how much they care about the project, and most importantly, how much power they have to influence what happens. That becomes your roadmap for how to handle those relationships.
So it's really not just about keeping everyone happy, right?
Yeah.
It's more like strategic engagement, figuring out what makes each stakeholder tick and how to approach them to get the best outcome for the project.
You got it. And there's actually a visual tool that helps with this whole strategic approach. It's called the Power Interest Matrix.
Okay, I am intrigued. Let's get into that matrix and see how it works.
All right, so the Power Interest Matrix. The source describes it as this visual tool, to really see how stakeholders relate to each other. Basically, you've got this grid, right?
Okay.
And one axis is for power or influence, and the other is for their level of interest in the project.
So we're literally just putting people in boxes based on how much power they have and how much they care about the project.
Well, yeah, but it's more than just that. It's a way to map things out, see the whole playing field, and each quadrant on this grid actually suggests like a different strategy for engaging with those stakeholders.
Okay, so walk me through those quadrants. Where do we even start?
Let's start with the high power, high interest folks. These are your VIPs, the ones who can make or break the project. Like, imagine you're designing a new emergency room for a hospital.
Okay.
The hospital administrator, they're going to be in this quadrant. They've got a huge stake in the project and the authority to make things happen or not.
So you're talking constant communication with these people, right? Maybe even involving them in the decision-making process.
Absolutely. You need their buy-in every step of the way. Now, on the flip side, you've got the high interest but low power group. The source uses the example of teachers in a school design project.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
They're passionate about the learning environment, but they might not have the power to actually make decisions about the design.
Right, you want to keep them in the loop, make them feel heard, but you also have to manage expectations, right?
Exactly. You can't overpromise things if you don't have the authority to deliver. It's about finding that balance, acknowledging their concerns, while being clear about where the decision-making power lies.
Gotcha. Okay, so those are the folks who are really invested. What about the people who maybe aren't as engaged with the project?
All right, so then we get into the low interest categories. Let's start with the high power, low interest group. This could be something like a city planning committee. They're focused on big picture stuff, like overall urban development.
Right.
They might not care about the specifics of your project, but you still need their approval to move forward.
Ah, so this is where you really got to sell them on the big picture, how your project fits into their larger goals, even if they don't see it right away.
Exactly. You're not trying to force them to be interested, but you do have to show them how their priorities align with yours. And then you've got the final group, low power, low interest. It's tempting to just ignore these stakeholders, but that can actually backfire.
Yeah, I can see how someone who seems indifferent could turn into a real opponent if they feel like they're being left out of the process.
Right. It's amazing how just a little bit of communication, acknowledging their existence, can prevent resentment from building up.
So this matrix really drives home the point that stakeholder engagement is strategic. It's not just about being nice. It's about understanding where everyone stands and making smart moves to keep the project on track.
And those moves often involve, tailoring your communication to each quadrant. Some stakeholders might need regular updates. Some might prefer one-on-one meetings. It's all about finding the right approach to nurture those relationships.
Speaking of relationships, the source really emphasizes that stakeholder management isn't just about checking boxes. It's about actually building genuine connections with these people.
And making them feel like they're part of the project's success. There's this great quote in the source. A client may not remember how much a project was over budget or behind schedule, but they will always remember how you made them feel.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's powerful. It reminds you that behind all the technical stuff, every project is ultimately about people, you know?
Yeah, people with their own hopes and fears and dreams. And if you can tap into that human element, that's where the real magic happens.
Totally. Okay, we can't talk about stakeholder management without addressing the elephant in the room, right?
Yep.
Project politics.
Ah, yes. The P word. It gets a bad rap, but is it really all bad?
Well, the source seems to take a pretty neutral stance on it, defining politics as the way people influence others to achieve their objectives, which, let's be honest, happens in any group, especially in a project setting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. It can be used for good or bad, right?
Right. And the source actually talks about good politics versus bad politics.
Oh, yeah. Like, good politics is about focusing on the we, building those relationships, finding common ground, working together to achieve something bigger than any one person's agenda.
Okay, so it's about using your influence to help the project, not just yourself.
Exactly. Bad politics is all about individual gain, even if it hurts the project as a whole. And that can get messy.
It sounds like it. So how do you, navigate that whole political landscape without, you know, losing your integrity or hurting the project?
Honestly, I think it takes a lot of experience. You got to learn to read the room, you know, understand the power dynamics, the unspoken rules, all the little alliances and rivalries going on behind the scenes.
So you need political skills on top of your design skills.
Absolutely. It's about paying attention, building trust with people, and figuring out what motivates them. And also knowing how to use your own influence in a way that aligns with your values and what's best for the project.
It seems like if you've done a good job of stakeholder management, built those relationships and really listened to people's concerns, that would help with navigating the politics too, right?
Oh, for sure. When people feel like their voices are being heard, they're less likely to resort to backstabbing or power plays to get what they want.
So it all comes back to building trust and open communication, which honestly is a good lesson for life in general, not just project management, right?
100%. It's about remembering that at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And when we work together, consider everyone's needs and perspectives, we can create something amazing.
I love that. So, deep divers, as we wrap up our exploration of stakeholder management, we want to leave you with this thought. Whether you're designing a building, planning a trip, or just navigating your everyday life, these principles apply. Think about who your stakeholders are. What do they care about? How can you work with them to get the best outcome for everyone?
It's something to ponder, even if you don't think of yourself as a project manager. Because really, we're all managing projects and relationships all the time.
We are. And remember, it's not just about managing those projects, it's about building those connections and realizing that the human element is at the heart of every successful endeavor.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So that's a wrap on today's Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations. Until next time, keep diving.